Part 1 Commander Zekthor stood on the bridge watching the screens with worry in his eyes, and the situation was getting worse with every passing moment, because the enemy ships kept coming, and there seemed to be no end to their numbers, and his own fleet was falling apart piece by piece, and he knew that within hours everything would be lost and his entire civilization would be wiped from existence, and there would be nothing left but ash and memories. And the thought made his heart heavy, with grief that he could barely contain, and his officers around him worked frantically trying to find solutions that did not exist, because they were simply outmatched in every possible way, and the reality of their impending doom was settling in like a cold weight on everyone's shoulders, and nobody wanted to say it out loud. But they all knew the truth deep down inside their hearts and minds. The Krath had arrived 7 days ago without any warning or declaration, and their ships had emerged from the darkness of space like nightmares made real, and within the first day they had destroyed 4 colony worlds and killed billions of innocent people who had done nothing wrong except exist in the wrong place at the wrong time. And the Vrexian military had responded as quickly as they could, but their weapons were designed for exploration and research, not for war and combat, and the Krath weapons cut through their shields like they were made of paper, and their hulls crumbled under the relentless assault. And now on the 7th day, the enemy was at the gates of their homeworld, and there was nothing left to stop them from completing their mission of total annihilation and genocide. Sira turned to him with fear in her eyes, and her voice was shaking when she spoke because she was young and had never seen real combat before this week. And she said that the 4th Defensive Squadron was gone, and the orbital stations were under direct attack, and they had maybe 6 hours before the enemy would be in position to start bombing the planet's surface and killing everyone down there, including her family and his family and everyone they had ever known or loved. And the weight of that knowledge was almost too much to bear. And Zekthor wanted to scream or cry or do something, but he was the commander, and he had to stay calm and focused even though inside he was breaking apart. He thought about his options and realized there were none left except one, and it was a terrible option that went against everything the High Council had decided decades ago. But the High Council was dead now because their chamber had been hit by enemy fire, and he was the ranking officer in the system, which meant the decision was his to make and his alone, and he would have to live with the consequences if he survived long enough to face them. And he took a deep breath and made his choice, because doing nothing meant certain death, but doing something might give them a chance even if it was a small one. He told Sira to bring up the restricted contact database, and she looked at him with confusion and concern, because that database contained information about dangerous species that were not supposed to be contacted under any circumstances, and it required special authorization that only the highest-ranking officials had access to. And he gave her his authorization code, and she hesitated for a moment before following his orders, and the holographic display appeared in front of him, showing a list of species marked with red warning symbols, and most of them were extinct, having destroyed themselves in wars or environmental collapse, and some were quarantined because they were too violent or unpredictable to be allowed into galactic society. One species caught his attention immediately because it had a unique classification that he had never seen before, and it read as Observation Only Class 12, Deathworld species, and the name attached to it was Humanity. And he remembered reading about them years ago when he was still a junior officer, and the reports had been disturbing and fascinating at the same time because these creatures had evolved on a planet that should not have been able to support intelligent life at all, and yet somehow they had not only survived but thrived and built a technological civilization and developed weapons of mass destruction while they were still confined to a single planet. The report said that Earth was one of the most hostile environments ever discovered, with crushing gravity and violent weather and aggressive predators and diseases that could wipe out entire populations, and yet humans had conquered it all and bent their world to their will through intelligence and determination and ruthlessness. And the Vrexian observers had watched them fight wars that killed millions of their own kind, and develop atomic weapons and chemical weapons and biological weapons, and the High Council had voted unanimously to avoid all contact because humans were simply too dangerous to introduce to the peaceful galactic community, and better to let them develop alone for another 1,000 years, or maybe forever. But now Zekthor was desperate, and desperate times called for desperate measures, and he knew that if the humans could build such terrible weapons while trapped on their own world, then maybe they had continued developing and maybe they had reached the stars by now and maybe they would respond to a call for help, and even if they did not arrive in time, at least someone would know what happened here and perhaps someday they would avenge the Vrexian people. He ordered Sira to compose a message using standard first contact protocols and to translate it into every human language in the database, and to include their coordinates and tactical situation, and most importantly, to tell them that they needed help desperately, and that billions were dying and would continue to die unless someone intervened. And she worked quickly with tears running down her face, because she knew this was a last resort born of desperation and not hope. And when the message was ready, Zekthor reviewed it one final time before giving the order to transmit on all frequencies and all channels and send it out into the void of space toward Earth. The message traveled through space at the speed of light, and Zekthor did not expect a response because Earth was dozens of light years away, and even if humans had developed faster than light communication, they would still need time to receive and decode and translate the message and decide what to do about it, and by then it would be too late, and everyone would be dead, and the Vrexian civilization would be nothing but a memory, and maybe someday human archaeologists would find the ruins and wonder who had lived here and what they had been like. But 23 minutes after the message was sent, Sira gasped and her hands were shaking on her console, and she said they were receiving a response and it was coming from Earth. And Zekthor felt his heart skip a beat because that was impossible, since the transmission lag alone should have been measured in years, not minutes, and he demanded to see the message. And the translation appeared on his screen in clear Vrexian text, and it said, "Message received and help is coming and hold on." And it was signed by someone called Admiral Richard Cole of the United Earth Defense Fleet. Zekthor stared at those words and felt a mixture of hope and terror, because the humans had a fleet and they had faster than light communication, and they were responding in real time, which meant they had been watching the galaxy for who knows how long, and they had technology far beyond what the Vrexians had believed possible. And now they were coming, and he had no idea if he had just saved his people or doomed them to an even worse fate than the Krath could deliver. Part 2 Admiral Richard Cole stood in the war room of the UEDS Vanguard, looking at the holographic displays that showed the Vrexian system in perfect detail, and the images were coming through the quantum Ansible network, which was technology that humanity had developed in secret over the past 15 years, and nobody outside of Earth knew about it, and that was exactly how the government wanted it, because surprise was often the best weapon in any conflict. And right now, the element of surprise was firmly on their side. Cole had known about the Vrexians for most of his adult life, because Earth had discovered them decades ago when radio telescopes picked up their transmissions, and the government had sent stealth probes to observe them and study their culture and technology, and what they found was a peaceful species that valued art and philosophy and science, and had absolutely no interest in war or conquest, and the decision had been made to watch them from a distance and learn everything possible about galactic civilization through them without revealing human presence because humanity was not ready yet. Commander Lisa Grant stood next to him reviewing the tactical data, and she was young and brilliant and had proven herself in combat during the Mars Rebellion, when colonists tried to break away from Earth, and again during the Titan incident, when pirates tried to take over the mining stations, and Cole trusted her completely because she had never failed him. And she understood how to think 3 steps ahead of any enemy, and that was crucial in space combat where one mistake could mean the death of everyone on board. The displays showed that the Vrexian fleet was being torn apart by an aggressive species called the Krath, who were clearly experienced warriors with ships designed specifically for combat and destruction, and their tactics were brutal and efficient, and showed no mercy whatsoever, and they were systematically destroying everything in their path and moving toward the Vrexian homeworld, with the clear intention of wiping out the entire civilization. And Cole felt anger rising in his chest because this was exactly the kind of thing humanity had prepared for. Grant reported that all 37 vessels in the Rapid Response Fleet were ready to go with crews at battle stations and skip drives charged, and Cole nodded because he had personally selected every ship and every captain in this fleet and trained them for exactly this scenario. And they were the best of the best, and they were about to show the galaxy what humans could do when properly motivated, and he felt a grim satisfaction knowing that the Krath had no idea what was coming for them. Cole studied the tactical situation carefully and saw that the Vrexians were outmatched in every category from weapons to shields to tactics. And their ships were beautiful, elegant things designed for exploration and research, but utterly inadequate for real combat. And he felt sympathy for them because they had clearly never needed to develop proper military technology, and now they were paying the price for their peaceful nature. And he was determined to make sure they survived this encounter. The communications officer asked about the diplomatic package and whether Ambassador Patricia Williams should transmit the first contact protocols, and Cole said no, because he wanted the Krath to see what happened to species that committed genocide, and let that be humanity's introduction to the galaxy, instead of words and promises and empty diplomatic niceties. And Grant smiled at that, because she understood his reasoning and approved of it completely. Cole pulled up the ship manifest and reviewed it one more time, even though he had memorized every detail weeks ago. And the UEDS Vanguard was his flagship, and it was a battle carrier hybrid mounting railguns that could punch through solid steel. Kilometers thick, and the UEDS Defiant and UEDS Relentless were dreadnoughts built for sustained combat, and able to take massive damage while dealing it back tenfold, and 20 destroyers and 10 frigates and 4 support carriers rounded out. The Force and every single ship had been built in secret in the asteroid belt and the moons of Jupiter, where nobody could see them. For 70 years, humanity had prepared for this moment and trained for the day when they would step onto the galactic stage, and every crew member had run through thousands of combat simulations based on theoretical alien encounters, and they had studied every scrap of information about galactic military doctrine and weapons technology and shield systems, and they had designed their ships and weapons specifically to counter what they expected to face, and now it was time to see if all that preparation would pay off. Cole opened a fleet-wide channel and told everyone that today humanity was taking its first step into the larger galaxy, and today they would announce themselves, not with words, but with action, because an innocent civilization was being slaughtered, and they had reached out to Earth for help, and humanity was going to answer that call and show the galaxy what it meant to be protected by Deathworlders who understood violence in ways that peaceful species could never comprehend. He looked at his bridge crew and saw Lieutenant Jake Morris at Tactical, and Commander Grant at Operations, and Ensign Caroline Phillips at Communications, and all of them were Earth-born and raised, and all of them carried the weight of humanity's reputation on their shoulders, and they were ready and willing and eager to prove that humans were not monsters, but guardians who would protect those who could not protect themselves. Cole continued his speech and said their orders were simple, and they were to defend the Vrexian homeworld, and eliminate all Krath military forces, and show no mercy to those who gave none, but accept surrender if it was offered, and let the galaxy see that humanity protects the innocent and defends the weak and stands against genocide and tyranny, wherever it appears. And his voice was firm and confident, because he believed every word he was saying. He ordered all ships to prepare for skip drive activation, and set the destination as Vrexian Prime, and gave them 60 seconds to final preparations, and the skip drive was humanity's greatest achievement, and it had been reverse-engineered from recovered alien probe wreckage 30 years ago and refined through countless experiments and testing, and it did not travel through normal space or even hyperspace, but instead skipped over space entirely and folded distances that should take years into mere moments. The countdown began, and Cole settled into his command chair and felt the familiar tension that came before combat. And he had been in dozens of battles over his career, but this one was different because this was first contact, and how they performed today would shape humanity's relationship with the galaxy for centuries to come. And he was determined to make it count, and show everyone that Earth stood for something greater than just military power. The countdown reached 0, and the skip drive activated, and reality twisted in ways that human minds were not designed to comprehend. And for a fraction of a second, Cole felt like he was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. And then the sensation passed, and they emerged in the Vrexian system exactly where they intended to be, and his tactical display immediately lit up with contacts showing Krath ships and Vrexian ships and orbital stations, and the planet itself hanging in space like a jewel about to be destroyed. Cole took one look at the situation and gave his orders, and the human fleet moved forward with purpose and precision, and the battle for Vrexian Prime was about to begin. Part 3 Commander Zekthor had accepted that death was coming, and had made peace with it in his own way, when suddenly every alarm on his bridge started screaming at once, and the sensors were showing impossible readings that made no sense whatsoever. And Sierra was shouting over the noise that massive spatial distortions were appearing in the system, and multiple contacts were emerging from nowhere, and her voice had gone high with panic and confusion, because this was not supposed to be possible. According to everything they knew about physics and faster-than-light travel, the tactical display updated and showed 37 new contacts arranged in a tight military formation, and they were massive, with the largest ship easily 3 times the size of the Harmonious Dawn, and Zekthor felt his blood run cold because he had no idea who these newcomers were or what they wanted, and for a terrible moment he wondered if this was some other species come to finish what the Krath had started and claim the remains of Vrexian civilization for themselves. Sierra worked her console frantically and reported that the drive signatures did not match anything in their database, and the hull configurations were completely unknown, and whoever these ships belonged to, they had just appeared out of nowhere, using technology that should not exist. And Zekthor asked if they were Krath reinforcements, and she said no, because nothing about these ships matched the Krath design philosophy or energy signatures. Then a voice came over the communications channel speaking accented but understandable Vrexian, and it said, "This is Admiral Richard Cole of the United Earth Defense Fleet, and we received your distress call, and we are here to help. And please stand clear of engagement zones." And Zekthor felt his heart nearly stop, because the humans had come, and they had come impossibly fast, with a fleet of warships that looked like they had been designed specifically for combat and destruction. The Krath responded immediately with a transmission in their own language, demanding identification and threatening to open fire if the newcomers did not withdraw, and Zekthor heard the translation and knew the Krath were making a terrible mistake, because they did not understand what they were facing, and Admiral Cole's response was brief and calm, and said, "Threat received and response follows," and then the human fleet opened fire. Zekthor had studied military history and tactics because even though the Vrexians were not warriors, they understood the importance of knowledge, and he had reviewed records of every major battle in galactic history, spanning thousands of years, and hundreds of conflicts, and nothing he had ever seen or read about prepared him for what he witnessed in the next few minutes. The human weapons were not energy-based like Vrexian plasma cannons or Krath particle beams, but instead fired solid projectiles that moved at a significant fraction of light speed, and when those projectiles hit a Krath battleship's shields, they collapsed instantly, and the second projectile punched through the armor like it was thin paper, and the ship broke apart in a cascade of explosions and debris, and it happened so fast that Zekthor barely had time to process what he was seeing. The human destroyers moved through space with impossible grace and acceleration that suggested gravity manipulation technology, decades beyond anything the Vrexians had developed, and they swept through the Krath formation like predators hunting prey and fired from multiple angles simultaneously. And when the Krath tried to target them, the destroyers deployed countermeasures, including clouds of reflective material that confused sensors and missiles that intercepted incoming fire. The larger human vessels simply absorbed everything the Krath threw at them, and their shields did not flicker or fail, and their armor did not crack or buckle, and they returned fire with devastating precision and overwhelming power. And Zekthor realized he was watching a species that had been bred by violence and forged in combat, and understood warfare in ways that peaceful species could never comprehend. Sierra whispered that the humans were dismantling the Krath fleet systematically and efficiently, and Zekthor could see it happening on his displays as ship after ship fell to the human assault, and the Krath tried to regroup and form defensive positions, but the humans anticipated every move and countered it before it could be effective, and in 8 minutes the Krath vanguard was completely destroyed. The Krath main fleet attempted to withdraw, and the human frigates pursued them with relentless determination, and their weapons targeted engines and weapon systems with surgical precision. And Zekthor noticed that the humans were disabling ships, rather than destroying them when possible and taking prisoners, which suggested they had rules of engagement and followed some kind of military code even in the heat of battle. 3 Krath cruisers broke formation and headed toward the planet, clearly intending to carry out their bombardment mission, even if it meant their own destruction, and the largest human vessel moved to intercept and positioned itself directly between the attackers and the planet with shields at maximum power. And Zekthor held his breath because he knew those 3 cruisers carried enough firepower to devastate a continent. The Krath cruisers fired everything they had at point-blank range, and poured all their energy into breaking through that one human ship, and for a moment the space between them was filled with weapons fire and explosions and energy discharges that would have vaporized any Vrexian vessel instantly. But when the light cleared, the human ship was still there, and its shields had held, and then it returned fire, and the three cruisers simply ceased to exist in flashes of light and heat. Admiral Cole's voice came over the communications channel again, and he said, "All Krath vessels, this is your final warning, and power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. And this is not a negotiation, and comply or be destroyed." And his tone was calm and professional, but carried an underlying threat that was absolutely clear and unmistakable. The remaining Krath ships surrendered immediately and powered down their weapons and stopped trying to flee, and Zekthor counted roughly 90 ships that had entered the system with such confidence and arrogance just days ago, and now they were defeated and helpless and at the mercy of a species they had never heard of before today. Sierra reported that the battle had lasted exactly 18 minutes from first contact to final surrender, and Zekthor could barely believe it, because the Krath had been fighting the Vrexians for 7 days and had destroyed dozens of ships and killed billions of people and seemed unstoppable. But the humans had arrived and ended the threat in less time than it took to eat a meal. Zekthor looked at his crew and saw the same mixture of relief and fear on their faces that he felt in his own hearts. Because yes, the humans had saved them, and yes, billions of lives had been spared, and yes, the Vrexian civilization would continue. But now they had to face the reality of what the humans were, and what it meant that such a powerful and dangerous species had just announced themselves to the galaxy in the most dramatic way possible. A new message came through from Admiral Cole requesting permission to come aboard the Harmonious Dawn for a meeting, and Zekthor granted it immediately, because he needed to understand who these humans were, and what they wanted, and whether the Vrexians had just traded one threat for another even more dangerous one. Part 4. 2 hours after the battle ended, Zekthor found himself aboard the UED's Vanguard in a conference room that felt both alien and strangely familiar, and the gravity was significantly higher than what he was comfortable with. But the humans had apologized and explained that their ships were built for Earth-normal conditions, and he was managing, though. His legs ached and his breathing was labored, and he wondered how these creatures could live and work in such crushing conditions every single day of their lives. Admiral Cole sat across the table from him, and the human was older with gray hair and eyes that showed the weight of command and too many battles. And next to him sat Ambassador Patricia Williams, who was apparently responsible for diplomatic relations, and both wore dark blue uniforms with silver markings that indicated rank and authority, and Zekthor noticed how they carried themselves with confidence and purpose. Zekthor began by expressing gratitude for saving billions of lives, and said the Vrexians were deeply in debt to humanity, and Cole nodded and said they were welcome, but then added that they had been aware of the Vrexian species for quite some time and knew that the Vrexians had classified humans as too dangerous to contact, and Zekthor felt his scales flush with embarrassment, because of course the humans would know about that decision. He apologized and explained that the decision had been made by the High Council, and not by the military, and many officers had disagreed with it, but had no authority to overrule the politicians, and Ambassador Williams asked what exactly the Vrexians had seen when they observed Earth, and Zekthor chose his words carefully, because he did not want to offend the people who had just saved his entire civilization. He said they had seen a species that developed atomic weapons before achieving global unity, and fought wars that killed millions, and lived on a planet that was actively hostile to life, yet somehow thrived there, and the Vrexian observers had concluded that humans represented a potential danger to the peaceful galactic community, and it had seemed safer to avoid contact until humanity matured, and Cole listened to all of this without interruption, and then said the assessment was not entirely wrong. Cole stood and walked to a view screen that showed an image of Earth, and it was beautiful, with blue oceans and white clouds. But Zekthor knew the reality behind that beauty, and the Admiral began explaining that Earth's gravity was nearly twice what most species could tolerate, and the atmosphere was oxygen-rich and highly reactive and corrosive, and the weather systems generated storms that could flatten cities, and there were predators and toxins and diseases that could kill in countless, horrible ways. The Admiral continued and said that humanity had survived all of these threats not by running or hiding, but by learning to fight back, and they had domesticated dangerous animals and learned to control fire and turned poisons into medicines and looked at every challenge their world presented and asked how they could use it to their advantage. And that was the fundamental difference between Deathworld species and regular species. Ambassador Williams took over and explained that when humanity discovered they were not alone in the universe, they faced a choice about what kind of species they would become, and they could have been conquerors using their natural advantages to dominate weaker species, or they could be something better, and they chose to be protectors who would defend those who could not defend themselves. She said that humanity had spent 70 years watching the galaxy and learning languages and customs and histories, and they noticed that most galactic species were peaceful and interested in exploration and trade and knowledge sharing, but they had no real ability to defend themselves against aggressive species like the Krath, and someone needed to fill that role, and humanity decided it would be them. Zekthor understood immediately and said the humans saw a galaxy that needed guardians, and Cole confirmed this, and said they had built a fleet not to conquer but to protect, and developed weapons, not to attack but to defend. And when they heard the Vrexian distress call, they came as quickly as possible, because that was what guardians do. Zekthor warned that there would be consequences and the galactic community would be afraid when they learned what humans were capable of, and they would see humanity as a threat rather than a protector. And Ambassador Williams smiled and said, "Let them be afraid, because fear breeds caution and caution breeds peace, and humanity did not want to rule the galaxy, but simply wanted to ensure that peaceful species could develop and flourish without being destroyed." The conversation turned to the Krath and what would happen to them now, and Cole's expression hardened, and he said the human fleet was taking them back to their homeworld, where they would stand trial for war crimes. And if the Krath government refused to cooperate, there would be sanctions, and if they resisted, humanity would dismantle their military capability entirely, because genocide would not be tolerated while humans had the power to stop it. Zekthor looked at the two humans and realized that humanity was not asking permission to join the galactic community, or seeking approval for their actions, and instead, they were establishing themselves as protectors and enforcers, whether the galaxy wanted them or not. And this was simultaneously reassuring and terrifying, because it meant the balance of power had shifted dramatically in a single day. He asked what would happen next, and Ambassador Williams explained that humanity would help the Vrexians rebuild and share some technology to improve their defensive capabilities and establish formal diplomatic relations, and Earth was ready to take its place in the galaxy. And they hoped the Vrexians would be their first true allies, and Zekthor felt the weight of that request, because becoming allies with humanity meant accepting everything that came with it. The meeting continued for another hour, and they discussed technical details about defensive systems and communication protocols and cultural exchange programs, and Zekthor learned that humans were surprisingly sophisticated despite their violent nature, and they had art and music and literature and philosophy, and valued many of the same things that Vrexians valued, and perhaps they were not so different after all. Cole explained that human ships would remain in the system for several weeks to help with repairs and provide security, while the Vrexians rebuilt their defensive fleet. And he also mentioned that humanity was establishing listening posts throughout the sector to monitor for threats and respond quickly if other species needed help. And Zekthor realized this was just the beginning of a much larger human expansion into galactic space. Ambassador Williams showed him plans for a joint diplomatic station that would orbit between Earth and Mars and serve as a meeting place for human and alien species. And the construction timeline was remarkably short, because apparently humans built things very quickly when motivated, and Zekthor wondered how his people would adapt to working alongside these energetic and driven creatures. The meeting finally concluded, and Zekthor prepared to return to his ship, and Cole walked him to the shuttle bay and said something that stuck in his mind, and it was that humanity had waited 70 years for a chance to prove they were not monsters, and the Vrexians had given them that chance by asking for help, and he was grateful for it. And Zekthor realized that in a strange way the humans needed the Vrexians as much as the Vrexians needed the humans, because everyone wants to be seen as more than their worst traits. As the shuttle carried him back to the harmonious dawn, Zekthor looked at the human fleet surrounding his world and wondered what the future would bring, and whether the galaxy was ready for humanity, and whether humanity was ready for the galaxy. And he decided that, ready or not, the universe had just changed forever. Part 5. 6 months had passed since the day humanity arrived and changed everything, and Commander Zekthor stood on the observation deck of the newly completed Vrexian Earth diplomatic station, watching ships come and go, and the station orbited between Earth and Mars, and had been built in record time through combined human efficiency and Vrexian aesthetic sensibility. And it was beautiful and functional, and represented hope for a new era of cooperation between species. The galaxy had reacted to humanity's arrival exactly as Zekthor had predicted, with fear and suspicion, and 3 major species had immediately closed their borders to human vessels and refused all diplomatic contact, and 2 others had filed formal protests with the Galactic Council, demanding that humanity be quarantined as too dangerous to interact with. And there had been serious discussions about organizing a coalition to contain the human threat before it could spread. But 7 species, including the Vrexians, had done something different and requested formal alliances with Earth. And when the Krath attempted a retaliatory strike against a human outpost in an asteroid belt, the human response had been overwhelming and swift and brutal, and within hours the Krath military ceased to exist as a meaningful force, and their homeworld was now under human supervision and rebuilding under strict guidelines. More importantly, word had spread throughout the galaxy about what happened at Vrexian Prime, and species that had never heard of humans before suddenly knew everything about them, and when the Zelkith swarm threatened peaceful Quinn colonies, the Quinn government sent a message directly to Earth asking for help, and a human response fleet arrived within hours, and the Zelkith withdrew immediately when they saw who they were facing. When pirates attacked a Torvian trade convoy, the Torvian merchants called Earth for help. And again humans answered, and the pirates were captured and handed over to Torvian authorities, and the grateful merchants spread stories about human reliability and honor throughout the trading networks, and slowly, grudgingly, the galaxy began accepting a new reality, that humanity was not going away, and despite their fearsome capabilities, they showed restraint and mercy and genuine interest in protecting innocent species. Zekthor heard footsteps behind him and turned to find Admiral Cole, who now wore an additional star on his uniform, because the United Earth Defense Fleet had promoted him and expanded his command to cover multiple sectors, and he had become the face of human military power in the galaxy, and his reputation alone was enough to make aggressive species think twice before attacking their neighbors. Zekthor congratulated him on the successful intervention with the Zelkith, and Cole dismissed it casually, saying the Zelkith learned quickly, once they understood humans were serious about protecting the Quinn, and withdrawal was better than destruction, and that was always the preferred outcome because dead enemies cannot become future friends. Zekthor admitted that when he sent that desperate message 6 months ago, he expected to die, and certainly did not expect any of this, and he gestured at the bustling station filled with humans and Vrexians and representatives from a dozen other species who had come to see this miracle of cooperation, and Cole said that Zekthor had taken a chance on a species he knew nothing about, and that took courage. Zekthor laughed and said it was desperation, not courage, and Cole replied that sometimes they were the same thing, and added that the Vrexians had given humanity something they had waited 70 years for, which was a chance to prove they were not monsters and a chance to show the galaxy that strength could be used to protect rather than conquer. A human destroyer maneuvered gracefully into a docking berth, and Zekthor watched it with mixed feelings, because the weapon systems were clearly visible even to his untrained eye, and they were reminders of the terrible power humans could bring to bear. But those weapons were silent, now standing watch over a station dedicated to peace and cooperation. And maybe that was the point. Zekthor said he had been thinking about why humans were so effective against the Krath, and it was not just technology but tactics and coordination, and willingness to take risks that other species would never consider. And Cole explained these were Deathworld advantages because on Earth hesitation meant death and caution had limits, and humans learned to assess threats quickly and act decisively and adapt constantly, and those survival skills translated directly into tactical superiority. He also mentioned that human crews did not panic when damaged or freeze when facing superior numbers, and they fought with determination that other species found shocking. And Cole said this was because humans were pack hunters by nature, who fought for each other and protected each other and died for each other if necessary, and every crew member knew their teammates would never abandon them, and that knowledge made them incredibly brave. An alert appeared on the station displays showing another request for assistance, and Zekthor read it, and sighed because the Phyraxian Confederation was reporting raids along their border and asking if Earth could send observers, and Cole pulled up the report and asked if it was pirates or organized military, and Zekthor said it was unknown, but the Phyraxians were not warriors and would be defenseless if the situation escalated. Cole immediately decided to send a patrol group consisting of 3 destroyers and a frigate for reconnaissance, and said if it was something bigger they would respond accordingly, and Zekthor watched the Admiral issue orders with casual efficiency and realized this had become routine over the past 6 months, and distress calls came in, and humans responded, and problems were solved, and the galaxy was learning that calling for help was no longer futile. Zekthor asked quietly if Cole ever worried that humans would grow tired of being guardians and decide the burden was too great, and Cole looked at him with an expression that was surprisingly gentle, and said that humanity was a young species that still remembered what it was like to be afraid and vulnerable, and watch loved ones suffer and die, and those memories were not ancient history, but recent painful reality. The Admiral continued and said that humanity had made a promise to themselves that if they ever had the power to prevent suffering, they would use it, and the galaxy might fear them, or resent them, or even hate them, but they would never wonder if someone would answer when they called for help, and that was humanity's gift to the galaxy, which was not weapons or technology, but a simple promise that you are not alone. Zekthor felt something stir in his chest that his species rarely experienced, and he realized it was hope. And he said that when Phyraxians first observed Earth, they thought humans were monsters waiting to be unleashed, and were terrified of what would happen if humans reached the stars, and Cole asked what he thought now. Zekthor looked at the Admiral and saw a representative of a species born in fire and forged in adversity, and a species that had every reason to be conquerors, but chose to be guardians instead, and he said that perhaps the Phyraxians were right, to be afraid, but not because of what humans might do to peaceful species, but because of what would happen to anyone foolish enough to threaten those under human protection. Cole smiled, and it was a predator's smile that reminded Zekthor that humans were apex predators from a world that did not tolerate weakness, and the Admiral said that was exactly the idea and the whole point of everything they were doing. They stood together looking out at the ships and the stars, and Zekthor thought about how much had changed in such a short time, and how humanity had taken their place in the galaxy, not as equals, asking permission, but as guardians declaring their purpose. And 6 months ago he would have been terrified by that. But now he felt safe for the first time since the Krath attacked, because humanity had proven they meant what they said and would do what they promised. The future was uncertain, and there would be challenges and conflicts and species that refused to accept human authority. But Zekthor believed that somehow it would work out, because humanity had something that most galactic species had lost over millennia of peace and safety, and that was the willingness to fight for what was right even when it was hard, and the determination to protect the weak even at great cost to themselves. And maybe that was what the galaxy needed most of all.